Recognise these people? What about these people? What you have just seen is a collection of some of the most successful acts to appear on The X Factor, along with those that are somewhat forgettable. Whilst it might seem a bit cliche, there's a certain truism to the fact that the most successful X Factor contestants have rarely been the actual winners of the season in which they appeared, whilst those that have won have faded from the spotlight. Why is this the case? To really understand this phenomenon, we have to look properly at what the X Factor is, and how it may differ from the qualities we look for in a successful pop star. From the audience stages, it's clear that the X Factor is more than just an ability to sing. The vast majority of auditionees can sing to some degree. Rather, the X Factor is touted as this sort of essential essence that is hidden deep within every person that can propel them into the stratosphere. The exact definition of it is never explicitly stated, but we're all certain we can recognise it when it is in front of us. More often than not, those that make it far in the X Factor aren't necessarily the most polished of singers. Rather, they are people that represent the show's central mythos, that anyone from anywhere can be a superstar. This is why a large number of the contestants we see have ordinary problems that we can all relate to. A job they hate, a failed ambition, or a sob story. It's a form of audience identification in which the successful contestants act as a sort of audience surrogate for those watching at home.
How did you come to apply for the X Factor?
Because my father died last September.
Every year, those auditioning are ordinary people, just like me and you, who are hoping to make the jump from watching the show on television to taking centre stage. And in this, the X Factor is a concept which is rooted in the idea of myth. One of the best descriptions of myths is given by E.O. James in his 1957 work Folklore, in which he describes a myth as something that is merely the result of an endeavour to express certain ways of thinking and feeling about the facts of life, which are brought into existence by the manner in which life is regulated in society. To explain this more simply, a myth exists to give tangibility and materiality to an idea which cannot be seen within everyday life. Because of this, the X Factor can be seen as a way to give a physical life to an idea that there is potential for greatness inside all of us. When someone possesses the X Factor, you see this myth in action. Perhaps the best example of this phenomenon is Sam Bailey, the winner of the show's 10th series. Bailey's first audition presents her as the archetypal everywoman, a mum who works as a warden at her local prison. The opening VT pushes us to believe that this woman is ordinary, and as a result we hear the same information about her twice. Once when she is in the audition room,
I work as a prison officer.
And then moments later when she is speaking to the judges.
And what do you do for a living?
I'm a prison officer.
Get out of here.
Everything about this woman leads us to believe that she's unremarkable, until she starts to sing.
Listen to the song here in my heart, a melody I start but can't complete.
This moment has become a trope of all of Simon Cowell's reality shows. One only has to look at the iconic audition of Susan Boyle to see this process in full effect, and the narrative that the show peddles is extremely clear. When you audition for the X Factor, you start off as this, and by the end, you have metamorphosized into this. And this narrative presents us with a clear character arc, the journey from the ordinary to the extraordinary. This narrative is essential for the show to continue to survive, because any deviation from this starting point of ordinariness would compromise the entire mythos of the show. When contestants audition for the show who invalidate this myth, it is very important that they do not go on to win the show. That's why someone as polished from day one as Ollie Murs has to lose to homegrown, ordinary talent such as Joe McElderry. A great example of this is season 6 contestant Daniel Johnson. For those of you who don't remember, Johnson's first audition for the X Factor was commonly known after broadcast as the best X Factor audition ever, mainly because Simon Cowell essentially said as such.
That was single-handedly the best first audition I have ever heard.
However, by the time of the live shows, despite no change whatsoever in Johnson's personality, the show had rebranded Johnson as a villain, who was overly confident, arrogant, and not popular with the viewing public.
You're a great singer, but you're definitely the most overconfident person in the competition. You need to become more likeable.
Now bear in mind that this was all said on the first episode of the live shows, meaning that there was no way to accurately measure how popular Johnson was with the viewing public. The narrative had simply been spun to give Johnson some form of chink in his armour. After hearing this criticism for 3 weeks, Johnson ended up in the bottom 2 and returns to the show a shambling mess, who was criticised by the judges for giving up.
I just felt like it was sad to see you, like you've lost your mojo, and I don't know, you feel like you've been stripped back too much and it's not your natural performance. I don't know what's going on.
I'm not saying here that the show or the voting was rigged against Johnson, that would be preposterous, but rather that Johnson's position as the best auditionee ever meant that he did not comply with the X Factor's myth that greatness can come from the ordinary. Rather, from his first audition, he presented something extraordinary. To see him win would not be a fulfilment of the show's central narrative. As I've mentioned before, this narrative is central to the show's expansion and continuation. You only have to look at the audition cues at the beginning of any season to see how the show tells the audience that anyone from anything can be a superstar. But this ordinariness isn't necessarily something that we look for in our contemporary pop climate. When we think of the biggest pop stars of our age, we think of Miley Cyrus, Justin Bieber, and Kanye West. These are all artists whose bizarre or extravagant personal lives are just as big a part of their appeal as their music. Artists such as Taylor Swift and Drake have made whole careers out of writing songs that detail their relationships and struggles with fame, and this phenomenon is the primary driver behind their appeal. We want to learn more about their ridiculous lives and experiences because they are so far removed from our own. Amidst this sea of exaggerated celebrity, artists such as Bailey start to look pretty ordinary or boring. The ordinariness of their origins holds no currency in their newfound pop environment. You can see this in the cover art for Bailey's debut single Skyscraper. When you contrast this to some of the biggest selling artists at the time of this song's release, the art behind Bailey begins to look pretty basic, conservative even, as if the extraordinariness that she possessed in the climate of X Factor has evaporated. There's a big issue with this whole process, because to be a successful pop star, you kind of have to have a massive personality, which is why more often than not, those that don't win on the X Factor can be more successful. Ollie Murs came onto the show a fully formed pop star, and he left exactly the same. There was never any homegrown narrative, no ordinariness to tap into and feed the show's mythos with. In this sense, he can leave the X Factor as Ollie Murs, whereas someone like Alexandra Burke, a winner who embodies this sort of try and anything is possible narrative, can't really go from this to this. To do so would be to lose what made her popular on the show in the first place, but to stay the same would mean she's less likely to stand out in a competitive pop environment. It's very much a catch-22. And I don't doubt that this is something the people behind the show are aware of. The contestants on the show need to be characters that fulfill roles in the X Factor that year. They need to have what are essentially character arcs and play a part in a grander plan to produce a series of emotional, funny, and powerful moments. But this recipe for reality TV success may not be the same as the one required to be a successful pop star. In fact, both recipes are made up of different ingredients entirely. So next time you watch the X Factor, ask yourself, does this person have the X Factor? And if so, is that necessarily a good thing?